Welcome to our first session for today, a panel discussion on current and future trends in management education. We have a panel of 4 distinguished deans with us, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Anju Seth, Dean of Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, Professor Francisco Veloso, Dean of Imperial College Business School in London, Professor Zhou, Dean of CUHK Business School at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Professor Martin Boehm, Dean of IE Business School, Instituto de Empresa in Madrid. And I'm George Iliev, Accreditation Director at AMBA in London. We'll start in a minute with the first question on the biggest trend in education in the last 1 year. But before that, may I remind our audience that today we'll keep half of the 75 minutes in this session for your questions. So please submit your questions in the tab on the right. There is a question tab where you can type up your question. And if you don't mind, please put your name and institution at the beginning of your question so we can have a bit of a more personal discussion. You can see our panel, but they cannot see you. And having your name will help, unless, of course, you want to remain anonymous, which would be fine. So moving on to the first question, perhaps starting with Anju. What's the single most significant trend in education you've observed in the last 1 year?
Well, of course, it is the ubiquitous online presence of education and moving to online from face to face, which has been a trend that we've all observed around the world. I think that it might be useful to talk about a couple of trends that are associated with the online presence, which I believe are also very important. And one is the uncoupling of coursework from degrees. So there's a greater degree of customization that we're seeing associated with this move online. In the past, when we were delivering our coursework face-to-face, we had a fairly structured curriculum, predictable curriculum, but in this online move, we've had to be very innovative in devising new ways of delivering courses that allow for students to hit the ground running, more learning by doing. And so that trend is associated with just the changing face of education in general in the business community, at least at IIM Calcutta. So we've been very fortunate that our flagship program, which is a 2-year program, is taught by faculty who also have considerable experience with blended learning in some of our executive programs. So the techniques that we use in blended learning are being introduced into the face-to-face, into the flagship program. So that's one important trend, a changing nature of education that is more customized, more learning by doing, and allowing for more autonomy on the part of the learner than would have been possible previously. I see that as an opportunity. I think it's a great thing.
Thank you, Anju. Francisco?
Well, I think that it's not a very dissimilar perspective from what Anju just mentioned, but of course with a couple of different twists. I mean, we were already quite present on the digital space. We have a global online MBA. It's been quite successful. We had launched already a business analytics online degree that has been equally successful. And actually this year we launched as well a strategic marketing online. So our presence on the online space was already quite significant. And therefore the school had, the capabilities, the tools, the faculty involved to weather this digital transition. I think the part that we're seeing in our own experience that I think is quite interesting, and I think will shape the future in diverse but very interesting ways, is the blending of the digital into the physical campus. And so because of COVID restrictions in our particular case, we decided to make all our classes multimodal because we have social distance requirements on the classroom. And so we have bubbles of about a third of the size that normal would be in a given class. So what we decided to do is to say that we're going to be able to connect all our classrooms to the rest of the bubbles that are not in the classroom. And that has been a very interesting experience. I mean, we had not done that. I mean, eventually the seminars and stuff like that, but now we're doing it with all our classes across all our graduate degrees. I mean, as a graduate school, we don't have undergraduate, but we have pre-experienced masters and post-experiences, MBA, etc. So we're doing that across all our product space. And it's been very interesting, the learning around that. And our view into the future is that that's, you know, after 1 year of doing this, we're not going to go back. We're just going to integrate these into the way that we operate and really think about what it is to operate a physical space, but at the same time is connected virtually beyond that space. And that's what I, you know, adjusting that is what to that and leveraging that and understanding what does it do to education is, I think, a very novel trend that I think is going to be quite significant into the future. I mean, we knew already kind of what the old single digital was, what the whole physical. There were some experiences on the blended space in different ways. I think that this blending of digital and physical is been taken to a whole different level with what's happening. I mean, the other thing, but we can comment that a little bit separately, is just the entering of all sorts of new players into this space on the digital side, qualifications, micro degrees, blended connectedness. I mean, even our own experience that we have is doing degrees with other institutions is growing. So just the experimenting on the digital space across many different levels is what I would see as the other trend, but I can comment a little bit back on that afterwards, not to take too much time.
Thank you, Francisco. Lynn, how are things looking from East Asia?
Well, I think, you know, the digitalization of education, in particular digitalization of the business education, it's everywhere. And you know, whether in India, in UK, in Hong Kong, in China, in other places, it's taking place. And these are the positive trends, I would say, that and even after the COVID-19 subsides, I think many of these things will continue, and that's positive. But may I also try to pick up some negative trends, and that is the decoupling of the world, in particular decoupling of China from the rest of the world. And that has a quite huge impact on some country in particular. I think it's in particular for many universities in UK, many universities in Australia, New Zealand, and to some degree university in the US and Canada. They've seen a lot less, a huge drop of number of Chinese students going abroad to these countries. And Hong Kong, we are seeing a bit, but not as bad as we thought it would be. But the physical barrier for students to travel from one country to the other, that has made many people thinking of a second time, again, whether they are going to study abroad. So for China in particular, the localization of education, which it means that many students would just stay home and attend different schools. And that seems to be happening. And the Chinese government also actually allow many universities, local universities, to increase their student intake in order to accommodate that. Now, this may be temporary, but depends on how and when the COVID-19 will subside. We still don't know. But together with the political decoupling of China from the rest of the world, I think that even when the pandemic subsides, you may still have an impact there. And in particular, I think in other area, in technology, the situation become even worse. And that is the, I would say that some of these already happening, but the pandemic made it even worse. and that may actually have a lasting impact, which is quite negative. And I don't know about other countries whether it is as troubling, but I just think for China, in particular, the China education market, it will turn inward, and that may have some implication for, as I said earlier, universities in UK and Australia. Of course, for the leading business school in these countries, probably the shortfall will be limited. But for others, and that can be a huge financial downturn. And we have seen that already. I mean, when we try to accredit some schools, and that has already become an issue that people have brought up. And so many students in particular, not just the other direction, will also have a problem. And even, I mean, for university in Hong Kong, we now have trouble recruiting international students coming to Hong Kong. So both the health issue and to some degree, and also become a political issue. And that trend is quite negative, and it may stay.
Thank you, Lin. Martin, how are things from a Spanish and global perspective as well?
Yes, I obviously have to say, first of all, I completely agree with my colleagues. I think the big shift, the big change this year clearly has been COVID-19. Absolutely. I think it has changed so many different aspects of our life, our professional and obviously as well personal life. And I think how we deal with students, faculty, how we manage our schools. Clearly, the fundamental change has been on the educational side. Here, I have to agree 100% with Francisco that I think this is here to stay. I think it's going to readjust to some extent a little bit. Some schools are clearly still completely locked down or have to significantly limit face-to-face interaction. That might go back to more normal levels again. But I think as well that obviously the mix will stay. So what we, for instance, have done, we essentially built a strategy around this, which we called the liquid learning strategy, which tries to communicate exactly that. It tries to provide much more flexibility, much more options of personalization, as Anju pointed out, to our students, basically being able to either come to class or connect to the class remotely through an infrastructure of hybrid classrooms. But at the same time as well, allow the faculty to make decisions about what is the most appropriate setting in order to deliver a class. And certainly what we have learned, I think, over the last few years, but also as well over the last few months, is that certain pedagogical approaches are just simply better delivered, more efficiently delivered, let's say, through online platforms than actually doing it in the physical classroom. So I believe as well, or at least for us, the decision is taken. This is here to stay. This is essentially the new normal, or it's becoming a new normal. However, in order to complement a little bit my distinguished colleagues, I think COVID-19 had as well major implications for us on two slightly different aspects. And that has to do on, let's say, the general student life. At least for us, the student life, the extracurricular activities, the casual networking, that I think was at least something that was really important for the students coming to our school. I think it's no secret that obviously Madrid is a very attractive location, a very attractive destination. Spain is a very attractive destination. And many students came here to learn Spanish, to learn about the culture, to get to know the locals, but at the same time have a lot of fun. And that is obviously severely affected. And what we have seen is that at the academic level, it is quite easy to structure the interaction with other students, have them work on projects, have them work on assignments. But what we, I think, still have to figure out is the casual interaction that typically happened at a bar, that I order something and I stand next to someone and that becomes my next best friend, or maybe my future business partner. I think this is something that we still haven't really figured out. Or maybe later on we can talk a little bit more about this, what we do in order to experiment or what other schools are doing. And the third aspect that I see is absolutely critical is the culture, the internal motivation of staff. I think where we invested quite significantly is in the mental well-being of our people, of our staff. And that starts from the cleaning staff all the way to our faculty. And just this morning I was on campus, and essentially the person managing the cleaning staff, she said, well, you cannot imagine how many times over the last few months I had to deal with even my staff, people crying because they can't cope with the pressure, with the situation, they're afraid and so forth. So I think it exemplifies, there's a lot of pressure on us as human beings, on us as individuals. We are afraid, sometimes we're overloaded with the situation, we don't know how to deal with that, and I think that is our responsibility as well, to make sure that everybody is going as good as possible through this crisis.
Thanks, Martin. A theme that comes up is synchronous versus asynchronous education. And if I can ask you a question about this, synchronous real-time programs have traditionally been the top end of the market, the premium end, live delivery, whereas asynchronous in the online space was traditionally the lower end of the market. Do you see a clear dividing line between the two, or are things now getting a lot more messier?
So I can say something about that and link it to a point that Martin was making, and I totally agree, that an important element of the mode, the face-to-face mode, is the networking capability that allows our students. It is such a hugely important aspect of the typical MBA degree. It's not just about the classroom experience. It is about the people you meet, the alumni you get together with, you talked about extracurricular activities, but all of those go a long way in building that network. And that is much harder to replicate in the asynchronous model. So at some level, when we say that these are two models and one is, there is a qualitative difference between the models. I'd rather think about it in that way. Now, Francisco talked about blended learning. I'm not sure what exactly he meant. Were you talking about, Francisco, learning, having classes that both reach an audience electronically, as well as having some students in the classroom? Is that what you meant by blended learning?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple dimensions of blended, but that was one in particular that has become much more visible for us and for other schools. That synchronous local physical with digital in the same synchronous environment.
So where I was going to was a different model of blended, which combines the asynchronous and perhaps even asynchronous digital delivered model with on-campus experience.
I think Anju's connection froze, but if I can move to Francisco, you also have, in addition to all the global online MBA and your newer programs on analytics and marketing strategy, you also have at Imperial the global public health online program. Yes. So you had an early start into the online space. How has it worked out, and where do you find the balance?
I mean, it has worked well, very well, and to connect to some of the question that you made earlier, George, and the points that Anju was making, and actually links back to some of Martin's comments as well, is that I think a very important sauce of delivering these programs is precisely a very important reflection about what works well synchronous, what works well asynchronous digitally, what works well synchronous physically, and then how do you put it all together. So what I mean, for example, with this is that, you know, in our global online MBA, we have both asynchronous and synchronous digitally, for example, but we also bring the students on campo for 2 weeks, one towards the beginning of the program and one towards the end of the program, to also create a physical connection between the students and between the students and the school and Imperial, right? So, and that's our approach. And I'm not saying that that's better or worse approach, but what I think is quite important is for each of the schools and for each of the programs, about depending on the objectives and the trade-offs, to recognize how to balance these various elements that are all part of the toolkits that we now can deploy. And depending on the price point, depending on the type of experience that you want to create, you will work with these various tools with different weights, depending on what you're trying to get. And of course, that we all realize, and this has been highlighted by my colleagues, that the physical kind of networking, you know, in some sense serendipitous, you know, discussions are quite important. And we know that in the digital world, they have to be programmed. So you can get a lot of interaction and a lot of connectivity, and we certainly have great feedback from our students in the Global Online MBA about the degree of closeness that they achieve through the mix of experiences that we create to them. But they also realize that it's not the same thing that if they are together for the full year. It's just a different experience with trade-offs that are associated with that. And so what I think the whole COVID and digitization brings is much more exploration into what you can do digital beyond the classroom. And so I know that we're trying all sorts of things, from doing you know, a simultaneously cooking lesson with a top chef, you know, to get the students engaged and connecting on a social ways, getting, you know, speakers to talk to them about certain types of conditions, you know, games and other things that they can do between themselves. I mean, we're experimenting with all sorts of different ways, recognizing that we're now in this world where even if we wanted to get them together in a physical environment, we can't. And this has spurred a lot of new experimentation on what you can do using digital tools. And this is not to say that it will ever completely replace the physical element and the you know, huge sensorial element that you bring out of being with other people in the room, which you can do. And I think we all have that experience. I mean, my own personal recent experience on that has been when I was welcoming the students, where I mean, now I'm talking to you in a webinar, there's many people connected to here, but I can at least see the 4 of you. You know, for me, the oddest experience on that digital space has been, I was doing you know, a webinar for, you know, close to 1,000 students online, and I knew that because I knew the number of students that were connected. But I was just staring at my screen in my living room where I am right now with zero feedback, and all of us that speak publicly know the energy you get from your students when you're teaching, or your audience when you're giving a speech. And it's very, very odd and very, very awkward, the level of self-motivation you get to do when you don't have the slightest feedback, not even, you know, 4 or 5 distinguished colleagues in a panel that you can, you know, see the smiles when you're making a comment. I mean, you're just talking into the ether. And so it's all a different set of experience that we all have to get through, and finding the right blend for each of the programs. But that's been kind of our own experience at Imperial, and that's true also for the Masters in Public Health that you talk. It's out of the Faculty of Medicine, but that's mostly digital and built that.
We lost your last word, Francisco, but everything else sounded like great fun at Imperial, as much as you can have fun in these conditions. A question to Lynn. At your part-time MBA program at CUHK, you were doing something very innovative. You were giving students the option to take part of their classes online, even if they could go to class. That was before COVID. And that optionality was the first time I've seen this around the world. How is it continuing?
Well, I mean, now we are actually expanding this model to all classes. So the situation, the pandemic situation in Hong Kong has improved tremendously, but still there are students who are less willing. They're less, they are more risk averse. And also there are students who are in mainland China or in other parts of the world who cannot come to Hong Kong physically. So all classes 2 weeks from now would be conducted in this mixed mode, as earlier Francisco and Martin also mentioned. So the students would have the option either come to the classroom face-to-face, or they can stay where they are and take it online. And so it is synchronized, and but not, again, digitally synchronized, but not physically. And that probably is going to last for quite a while. So this is something that we have to handle. But I think that another dimension of between the synchronized model and the asynchronized model, in addition to its educational delivery, but earlier you mentioned that why one is considered of premier value, the other is less so, has a lot to do with the selection of the students. Because many schools now are trying to use the digital space in order to expand their market, and they will go global. They will try to take as many students as possible from other parts of the world, and those who in the old days are impossible. But the problem is that if you do that and you try to expand really, I mean, through the digital world, and you lose the selection aspects of it. And so education, as one of the Nobel laureate, Michael Spence, said, there are two values. One is, of course, learning. The other is a signaling value. So if your program become less selective, and then the value of signaling becomes certainly less. So one has to be very careful. So even we introduce online learning, we probably still want to keep the standard of the students you are going to admit. And then probably the value will still there. So most schools, they want to use digital learning as a tool to add more variety, add more experience, enrich the learning experience of the current students, instead of try to expand your market too aggressively. And that probably would dilute the value of the degree, not just the learning, the delivery part, but also the signaling part. So that's something that I think most schools got to be very, very careful. And I think for most leading business schools, they are not really trying to expand it aggressively, and they still will want to maintain the exclusivity of the program, so that the value of the degree is still there.
Thank you, Lin. Martin, IE, just like Spain, is this empire on which the sun never sets. You have programs from Singapore to Brown in North America, Latin American students in a range of MBAs. How is it working out with the synchronous and asynchronous?
So thanks, George, for that question, because to be completely honest, I would like to complicate things a little bit. Because I think the relevant dimension is actually not synchronous and asynchronous, to be completely honest. Synchronous and asynchronous is, for me, a time dimension. Synchronous, everybody is at the same time somehow together. Asynchronous, well, could be a collaboration over time, that not everybody is sitting together. So let me give an example, because for me the other dimension is really the degree of social learning. So let me give you an example. If I'm in the physical space and I'm, as a faculty, just stand up and deliver a PowerPoint speech, well, it's very little social. It's very little interaction, right? It is just a one-way communication. And that obviously could be done in the typical asynchronous way online as well. When we think of the typical MOOCs or the typical certificates, right? And like, instead of having the faculty stand live, I essentially just have a recording. But obviously as well, in the physical classroom, I could deliver case study discussions which are much more social, or sometimes we refer to that as well as horizontal learning, because it's not only the vertical learning taking place between the faculty and the student, but also as well the learning among the different students through the interaction. And I think that could happen as well, obviously in, let's say, in a synchronous fashion, using, let's say, platforms like this one, or Zoom, or Teams, or anything like this, where everybody comes together and discusses a case. But what we do at IE quite frequently is as well doing this in an asynchronous fashion, but equally social, equally interactive. So for instance, what we use is we use discussion boards in order to discuss case studies managed by the faculty over typically a time frame of 3 to 4 days, where students at their leisure, at their time when they actually are available, connect and try to respond to questions of the faculty or interact with the other students who have already responded to the question of the faculty member. So I think it is important to distinguish really about these two different dimensions. The time dimension, which really refers to synchronous and asynchronous, but really as well the social dimension of, well, does the interaction take place between or among faculty and students, and more importantly, I would say, among the different students. And I think here lies clearly, in addition to what I think Lynn said about the signal effect, I think here lies as well the differentiation as well between, let's say, premium products and, let's say, less premium products, or the more volume products, I would say. And the degree of interaction, the degree of social learning that is taking place. And I think this has always been a differentiator for us as business schools from the traditional universities, where we're not necessarily delivering lectures to classrooms of 500 or 800 or 1,000 students, where you just have someone lecture to the students, but not really allowing for any interaction or experiential or social learning.
That takes me to my next question on learning design and the importance of learning design. Do you feel that every leading business school around the world should have a dedicated team of learning designers? Perhaps Martin, starting with you.
Sure, happy to do that. So I can tell you a little bit more what we do, and to some extent this implies what I think about it, I guess. So we clearly have a dedicated team for that. We actually have a department which is called Learning Innovation, and it is actually composed of 2 different teams with slightly different angle or a slightly different focus. One would be really the traditional instructional design team that we know. So these are people who have been trained in instructional design, who have a pedagogical background, and their main objective is to work with faculty in order to, let's take a physical class to the online space, or trying to support as well faculty, more generally speaking, around how to maybe take a class or incorporate more social components, more experiential components, making a class more fun, more engaging, and so forth. The other team looks a little bit more on the technology side, techniques, or the technology side, the IT side, I would say. So these are more people with a techie background, and they basically look around and see what are the new technologies coming out on the market, not only limited to the educational space, but generally speaking. So that's like AI, or I don't know, holograms, or virtual reality, augmented reality, these kind of things. And what they then try to do is try to understand the technology, because that's their field of expertise, and then think a little bit more about, well, so how could that potentially be leveraged in an educational space? And obviously, what is typically required in these processes is that both of these teams, to some extent, work together. So this is a little bit how we structure this. Obviously, the instruction time, the design team is significantly larger than the other one, especially in these times of COVID-19. I think we had to invest significantly here in order to help faculty transition to the online space, and obviously improving their online game. And I think it answers a little bit your question that you asked, do I believe that any top business schools needs this kind of infrastructure, this kind of support? I really believe so. I really believe so, at least in order to support the institution more strategically, to keep a tab on the research around instructional design, in order to condensate this, summarize this, and share this as well with the faculty, in order so that they can have their pedagogical approaches, their understanding of learning up to date.
Thank you, Martin. Francisco.
I mean, clearly, I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, we have, in our case, the two functions that that Martin mentioned for the case of IE, we have it all combined in what we call an EdTech lab, so our educational technology lab that takes precisely the combination elements of technology and education and works with our faculty and by themselves in terms of new solutions around education that are relevant for our delivery. And I would say that there are several components to this. There is those that that have already been mentioned. You know, so how do you organize your teaching? What are the new tools? How do you leverage technology in the classroom? Of these elements. What are the platforms that are out there that can support a good digital and physical component? But I would add also a couple of different complementary elements that I think are getting increasingly important, and I think in the future will become even more. And therefore, I think will create over time a big disadvantage to any top business school that does not have these elements well organized and well resourced. One has to do with things that are even outside of the classroom. So, for example, you know, should we start using, say, 3D or 3D classes and virtual to teach students how to speak in public settings, for example, or conduct interviews, for example. So the whole careers part, I think the use of technology on the careers, anything from gaming to because, for example, the way that a lot of the companies now are doing recruitment take some of the management consulting is through gaming devices on the recruitment side. We need to make our students feel very comfortable with that. And that's not something that's necessarily happening associated with a classroom. It may as well. I'm not preventing that, but there's many other things on the education and the preparation of the students on leadership, on engagement with companies, on public speaking, on careers that can benefit a lot and are increasingly being leveraged with technology, with different approaches towards learning. That is very critical that a top business school reflects on and brings to the toolkits, the types of things that they work at and expose the students as part of their mission and their goal. I mean, if it is about delivering a leadership class, you know, for our case, it may be that's very valuable to take our students and put them on, say, the carbon capture lab, where we throw them with typically a problem in a carbon capture plant to test their leadership skills. And that's because we can benefit from the carbon capture lab that we have at Imperial College in the Department of Chemical Engineering. You know, so that's one way that we're leveraging technology in a different element to really, teach students how they can engage and think about leadership roles, working in teams, reacting to adversarial environments. That's different. The final element that I wanted to bring, which I think is increasingly becoming important, and for us, I see as quite critical for the future, is actually that we learn about how our students learn and feed that back to the way that we organize things. So what do I mean by that? For example, we've been capturing all the interactions that our students have on their global online MBA, and we have a partnership with the Department of Mathematics to do research about how they learn, what types of study approaches they do. Are they a crammer? Are they a steady learner? Are they a last minute? Does it make a difference? I mean, do you learn better? Do you have better outcomes, right? Is it worthwhile to let them know that their learning approach suggests from prior information that they are going to have worse results and they may want to rethink their learning approach? So the fact that we're digitizing the education experience more also means that there is a huge opportunity for us to better learn how students learn, and that we then work with them to try to make them better learners, and for us as a business school to also understand what are the kinds of things that we want to do that have better outcomes or worse outcomes on the job market and on their future career. So that there is the science of learning and science of education that I think is also going to be taken to a new level with the vast amount of data that is becoming available by the process of digitizing. And I feel that that's going to be a very important part of the future of business education as well. Not just business education, but also for business education.
Thank you, Francisco. Lynn, learning design teams?
Well, I mean, I think we are still more traditional school. I mean, although we have IT support, we also have another office called Teaching and Learning, which help to champion the adaptation of adoption of new technology. But they are, I have to say that we are probably less entrepreneurial than schools like IE or Imperial, which has a very strong engineering school, which probably can take advantage of the engineering school and what they have done there. So our program, I would love to see that we have dedicated staff would actually help to try to combine all the technology that are available and then try to apply it to different facets of the education. And now we're doing it very segmented and hologram, yeah. And now I know actually we can do it because in the graduation ceremony, and we are not allowed to have students have a photo taken with the dean or the other senior staff in physical world, because you have to put on your the mask, you have to do those social distancing measures. So we actually use a hologram to try that, and the students, and some students actually cannot even return to campus and to join the real ceremony, but they can take a photo in the digital space. And so there are this, segmented use adoption of technology, but not in an integrated or more aggressive way. And that part, but I think it's very important. But some faculty members also have the belief that at the end of them, probably the learning probably would take place best with face-to-face model. So it's struggling between the technology and also the very traditional way of thinking. And somehow Chinese people are quite insisting that the best learning model is face-to-face no matter what. And even though, in commerce, there are lots of very innovative way of doing business. And if you talk about electronic commerce, and the Chinese companies, they are doing lots of new things. And even TikTok now in the West become quite popular. However, in education, it's still quite conservative. And but we are certainly paying attention to what many other business schools are doing, and trying to be more innovative. If not our own, at least we try to be quick learner.
Thank you, Lin.
So I should apologize. Sorry, I said I should apologize. I keep vanishing. We have a dreadful thunderstorm, so you may be able to see lightning flashes from my windows. The reason I'm vanishing is because the internet periodically is departing. But I did want to make a remark about the very important issues you've been discussing. I've encountered all of the models that you've talked about in my previous universities with large engineering schools. And so the universities with departments in different areas, and that is those are very different environments than the standalone business school that we are at IIM Calcutta. We don't have the wherewithal to be able to capitalize on a large EdTech department that serves the university, either from the point of view of the technical expertise or the learning, the new course creation in a digital format kind of assistance that Martin described. But what we have been finding at IIM Calcutta is that it is really valuable to partner with specialist organizations that provide these sorts of services. I mean, for example, we have a partnership with Coursera to launch, with the first Coursera partner in India, to launch specialized certificate programs that we want to then think about modularizing towards an MBA program, perhaps, and so on. So I think what we're finding is that there are a large number of service providers who can offer us the capabilities that we need in order to be able to achieve this digital transformation. Now the question is, how exactly do you implement that in a seamless fashion? And that's a difficulty that we have. Relative to my North American experiences with universities, there is somebody who you can get on the other end of a telephone call and they will be there to help you out. It's not that simple when you're dealing with a service provider. You have to find them, work with them, build that mutual understanding. But once you have that mutual understanding, it's great.
Thanks, Anju. IIMC used to mean IIM Calcutta. Now it means IIM Coursera. You're the first.
Don't say that.
Right. We have a bunch of questions in the question tab. If I can start with two questions from South Africa. Jakob Volschenk from Stellenbosch is asking, virtual synchronous delivery opens up education to attract students from anywhere. Do students still prefer the local schools as opposed to doing an MBA with a geographically far removed school? Any takers, Francisco?
I can start. So it's a very interesting question because I think we see actually both extremes. So our global online MBA, which is delivered mostly remotely. I mean, as I said, I noted that there's a week at the beginning and a week towards the end where we do bring them on campus, but all the rest of it is remote. It's both very local and the most global one, including from Africa. So that's the program where we have a greater participation, for example, people from African nations across all Africa, but in particular where English is an important language, but all across Africa. But we also have a substantial fraction of that are just here in London, and they just choose it for the flexibility. So we see a little bit of the mix. I think it's people that want that flexibility if they're local, and they still are an important group that are very present in our offerings, but it also draws on a very global population, and it's the more diverse of our programs on that regard because of that possibility. So that's the way that we have been experiencing this as we moved into the online offering education. I mean, we don't offer any program that is completely asynchronous. I mean, all our programs have an element of synchronous and social, using the words that Martin very helpfully put together. So our programs, we don't have what we would think of as a MOOC. I mean, we have some MOOCs that are just for pre-course kind of basic skills. But in terms of our degree programs or our programs, even the digital one, are a combination of synchronous, asynchronous elements, depending on what we think works better. So there are things that are happening with everybody synchronous digitally, and things that are done asynchronous with variety of elements depending on that particular bit of learning that we're trying to achieve.
Thanks, Francisco. Martin?
Yeah, just to really quickly add to that, I think one of the things that we shouldn't forget is in a synchronous delivery is obviously the timing of the session, right? I mean, at the beginning, Lynn said as well, it's getting night in Hong Kong, it's getting dark. Well, that is as well to some extent a challenge when you deliver these kind of programs, because right now we don't have anyone from the West Coast in the US. But if you try to deliver a truly global program from the West Coast all the way to Australia, you're obviously running into significant issues. So one of the things that we have seen personally is that our online MBA, which is very similar to the Imperial one, attracts primarily students from this time zone, primarily from Europe, with the occasional ones from the US, Latin America, and Asia. So comparing our online versus the full-time MBA on campus, our full-time MBA on campus is much more diverse, much more international. An interesting fact here is as well, I think it's maybe a year or 2 years old, that study. They did a study in the US in order to see as well what is essentially the draw that online MBA programs have. And obviously it's interesting to look into the US because it's probably the most developed with respect to online MBAs. And what they actually found is that the large majority draws their students from a radius of around 50 to 80 miles around the university, which actually indicates a little bit what Francisco pointed out as well, is that, well, it's to a large extent a convenience aspect. I anyway wanted to go to that school. It's just convenient. I don't have to commute back and forth this 1 or 2 hours in order to get to class. It also shows as well that obviously branding is absolutely critical. And if I go, let's say, not for the top, but I go maybe for the second layer, clearly I'm going to go for the local brand because I probably will stay in the region, and then having a local brand, having a local network is actually critical, is essential.
Thanks, Martin. Lynn or Anju?
Yeah, I mean, the branding is an important issue, and certainly I think that if you are a leading business school, then your branding would allow you to take in students from other part of the world. But you also have to be careful that if you become less selective, and then the value of your degree will become less. And so local schools certainly have the advantage of not just the convenience, but also the large network. So if you can think of the Hong Kong, and then if you attend one of the leading business schools in Hong Kong, and there are many other people in the industry also graduate from a program, and they are going to become your important part of your network. And that's going to be very helpful. If I just take some degree from, let's say, South Africa or some other places where there is not many alumni around, and then it doesn't add value. So I think for many people, going to a local business school, and whether online or not, and that's less than an issue. And in fact, the flexible mode that we provide to our students, again, it's not trying to attract students outside our part of the world, but rather to give students more flexibility, still cater to the local market, in particular in the part-time program.
Thanks, Lynn. Anju?
We have an interesting problem in that we just are capacity constrained. I fully take the point that Lynn was just making, to protect our brand, and not just to protect, but to continue to build our brand. We accept a very small proportion of the students that apply to us, and we would love to have more international students, but don't, simply because we don't have the physical space for them. So we see online or blended as a very nice opportunity to bring diversity into the classroom for better learning all of the participants in our programs. And hopefully we'll be able to capitalize on that in that passion, build our brand. And Calcutta is incredibly well known in India and across the world for its amazing alums who have taken positions in industries in countries of Europe, in the US, as well as in India. So how do we continue to build that presence, that brand of amazing graduates who deliver astounding results for the corporations and the NGOs and the entrepreneurial ventures that they start up with, but with adding that international dimension, which at this point in time, we don't have a lot of. Our internationalization is largely a function of study abroad kinds of experiences. So to us, online presence is an amazing opportunity to add a new dimension of internationalization to our programs.
Thanks, Anju. Henny Visser from the University of South Africa is asking more of a technology question. What is the minimum requirement for a school that doesn't have an online presence to enter the online space? Francisco?
I mean, I think it really depends. Like everything nowadays, there are a variety of partners out there that have all the technology and even the expertise that you can access readily. But the thing is, you'll have to share revenue with them, right? And also have other risks. And so, my sense is that it really depends on your strategic aspirations and planning. I mean, if you want, it's different from wanting to have a presence digitally, and you may want, and you need to do it fast, and you don't have the time to build your capabilities, and you can do some partnering, and that's certainly something that that is available. And that means that in many ways you can rely on the expertise of a firm to help navigate through the technology and navigate through even the learning design without necessarily having a strong team internally. But on the other hand, if you as a school are not there, but are understanding that this is going to be an important part of your future, and you want that to be part of the capability set that you have, then you need to be building up that capability over time at the rhythm that your finances and your strategic aspirations allow you to do that. But at the moment, and this goes back to the question that you asked earlier, I think that this is, part of our present and certainly part of our future. And so a business school that does not have these capabilities should be thinking very hard about either developing them internally or accessing them through a partnership. And that, one is not better than the other. They just depend on where you are and what you want to get over the medium and long run, and then plan accordingly. I mean, in our case, we've made that strategic choice 7 or 8 years ago, that this is something that we wanted. I mean, as a school that's at the leading edge of innovation, tech, entrepreneurship, it made sense for us that that should also apply to ourselves, and that we should be at the forefront of tech on the educational, which is a very important part of what we do as an institution. And so the business school has been very much at the forefront of pushing the frontier on this side, even within college. I mean, we are within college, actually, we are the most significant contributors to college in terms of educational technology. I mean, college and the experiences in other parts of college bring other values and other very interesting elements, and I've shared a couple of examples related to that. But in terms of delivering, digital education within Imperial College, the business school is actually at the forefront of that, because business schools all around the world tend to be very much teaching oriented and student satisfaction oriented, and that's also true for ours. Sometimes much more than what you find in the other technical areas that tend to build off more directly of the research, and the student experience may be lagging the pressure to find on the business education. And so in that sense, it's been quite important, and for us it's very strategic.
Thanks, Francisco. Any other thoughts, or shall I move on to the next question? Stephanie Guerras from Technical University of Denmark is asking, what works better when delivered online than in person? Martin?
Happy to take this a little bit, because I'm teaching right now and I taught this morning. So one of the things that actually works much better online than face-to-face is if you have students work in smaller groups. So right now my class, due to social distancing, is essentially limited to 25. But for instance, today I did an exercise where I had to group them into pairs, right? Or last week I had an exercise where I had to break down the 25 students in groups of 5. So that is obviously much easier to do online because with a press of a button, I essentially can push them into a breakout room and I can have them discuss there. I have the advantage as well. I don't have to go from room to room physically, but I basically, again, with the push of a button, I can join a certain group discussion and resolve questions or anything like that. They can let me know as well if they have questions, and I can join that particular breakout group. And obviously, what probably is important as well is once the allotted time is over, again, with the push of a button, I can bring them back. So my experience before has been that with these kind of pedagogical approaches, you lose a lot of time until they walk to our breakout rooms, sit down. One of them has an idea, well, it's a great time to get a coffee, so should I bring you a coffee as well? And then suddenly you see them there in the breakout rooms with coffee and potato chips and essentially having a blast. And the same obviously happens on the way back. So these kind of things, I think, work much more efficiently, in my opinion, especially if you want to break them up in groups and have them work before you actually bring them back together again.
Thanks, Martin. Any other thoughts on this? Or can I move to the next one? A follow-up from Stefan Guerras. How is the marketing of the programs changing? Do you see any difference?
I mean, I'm happy to make a comment on that. I mean, with two things. One is, I mean, all these, we're talking a lot about digital, but even with all the challenges that we've talked about, you know, the fundamentals, at least for I see for the leading business schools, and that certainly is the case for us, have not changed in terms of student interest. And so the biggest, we've had, you know, a huge growth in applications this year. We had a record number of applications across all our programs in the ones that we have on campus, despite all the limitations. And so this is something that's quite significant on that regard. So, and I'm prefacing this before addressing the issue on the online. It's not clear from the question if there's a differentiation about whether they were looking at the digital versus the physical. I mean, what we do find is that the cycle of sale, let's put it this way, on the digital programs is different because everything is connected, and that the lead time that you need to be able to engage in a digital program where you're not coming to campus is very different. So that allows you to manage the pipeline and the funnel in a different way when you're working with the candidates in terms of the overall timeline. I mean, if you're wanting to have an on-campus program, especially one like ours where it's 90% international, I mean, people have to get visas, they need to get accommodations. I mean, you need to really plan things with a huge timeline, and you need to make decisions for everybody's sake quite ahead of time. You know, when you're marketing a digital program, you can manage that cycle very different and much closer to the actual start date. So that whole timing is very different in that regard. One thing that's increasingly common is just the use of modern marketing techniques digitally to advertise. I mean, all the advertising about the programs tends to have a digital nature, and therefore all the schools use as normal, the normal modern tools of the CRM world to manage that that whole process, and that allows you to think strategically about where you want to put your ads, when, what markets. How do you manage that engagement? How do you manage the evolution of that at each stage? So in that sense, I think it's as similar as it is to many other digital marketing initiatives. The timing and the organization of it is quite different between the digital and the on-campus because of these elements that I noticed. That's at least our experience.
Thanks, Francisco. A question to Martin on the use of asynchronous notice boards. Doesn't this increase the time commitment from faculty?
Yes, very, very quick answer, yes. We actually compensate our faculty as well for that. So as every institution, I think we have obviously a certain teaching obligation, and these kind of discussion boards, yes, basically get you more credits towards the teaching obligation. But I think it depends a little bit as well how you set this up, how you manage this. I think the big challenge is, as in our case, the session drags on essentially for 3-4 days. As a faculty, you can't disconnect. You always have to be more or less checking in on that class, and that obviously is a very stark difference to the typical case discussion, let's say in a physical classroom where I walk in and after 80 minutes everything is done. Right away, so it's probably a little bit more mentally. You have to be a little bit more connected over a longer time frame.
One question on the winner-take-all future. Don't you? Here is the question. Doesn't it become a zero-sum game? The richer schools will become richer while the rest fall behind. And is that good for the mission of management education? That's a tough one.
Well, I don't think, I mean, education is something very different from other products. I mean, you can have an Apple which dominates, all markets. But in education, again, as I said earlier, that there is this two functions. I mean, one is the delivery of education material, of course. Then the other is the brand, the signaling feature. If you have a big market, and then certainly the brand value will be diluted. So I will see that education market still will be quite segmented. You have some leading schools, and these leading schools, by definition, won't go crazy, won't go big, and they are going to be rather restricted in their size and to maintain their exclusivity. On the other hand, of course, if you look at the mass market, and then probably you will see that there are some bigger players. But so far, I mean, we have seen many such attempts in the US, either by the existing universities or by some commercial players, and they haven't succeeded yet. And that probably to some degree, as we said earlier, that business education is a multidimensional. It's not just the learning the knowledge from the book or from the place. It's really the network, the learning by doing, and then the future employability, and all these things. I think local schools still have some local monopolistic power. So I don't see the case where, like in any other products, consumer products, you will have a, mega player which take all the markets. But rather, I think there still will be segmented market. But you have to again take advantage of your unique position in order to survive.
If I may say as well, I completely agree with Lynn. I don't think that our sector is a winner-takes-it-all industry, right? I think there might be maybe some network effects, but clearly they're not extreme network effects. And I really see as well that the technology doesn't have to be a significant factor, or the resources that I have available doesn't have to be necessarily a factor of success. As Lynn pointed out, and as we said already before, I think there is still the divide, the segment that is looking for a truly global education for a global brand, and clearly the segment that looks for a regional brand, for being embedded regionally. But even at the global level, I think schools are still differentiated. We already have that global competition at the top. But well, there's reasons why I go to Harvard, and there are other reasons why I go to Wharton, to name two schools that are not present here, right? And my last comment I wanted to make is, yes, maybe technology is going to be more important in the future, but Francisco pointed out already before, technology is not that expensive. And even if I feel it is expensive, there are third-party providers who would be happy to sponsor that for me for a share in the revenue. So I can actually push the risk to these guys, I can push the investments to these guys, and well, just have them participate, have them being a partner.
Thanks, Martin. One question on the impact of COVID on different courses. Has, for example, a difference between MBAs and Masters in Management. If COVID has impacted these different courses differently, does this have any implications for the strategy of business schools? Any takers? Francisco?
I can try. We have to think about what it's to impact differently. The issue is that the students on the MBA, I think, are even more acute to the issue of the networking, the experience, and all these elements. So that means that and certainly we were careful about that in our business school to realize that this is something that we have to be quite careful on how we manage because of the expectations that the MBA students have. And so I don't want to, with this, to downplay the relevance that also has at the pre-experienced master's level. They're also relevant there, but in some senses it's at a different degree. And so the COVID and all the social restrictions, I would say, impact more the MBA, because especially the full-time MBAs, because of that's of course not relevant for the global online MBA. And so that's what we see is the difference. Is the more you move up in the product, and even that's even more true probably for the executive MBAs, to the extent that they're born on campus as opposed to an online executive MBA, for example. So the more the social element and the seniority and the expectation of the participant is on that social dimension, the more wary they may be about embarking into a program that has a lot of social restrictions, right? And that's kind of like the way I see some of that difference manifesting. But but that's just in terms of the students then commit. If you just think more generally about, say, student applications or something like that, we did not see a very significant difference in say the trends in applications on the MBA versus the masters in terms of what the impact of the COVID was. Now, on the take-up is a slightly different thing.
Thanks, Francisco. We have more than 15 more questions in the chat box, but we are running out of time. So perhaps, Anju, one last question to you, because the thunderstorm was taking you away from us for some parts.
Yes.
The Coursera partnership, how is it going?
Very well indeed. I was having a long conversation with Jeff Maldonado just a couple of days ago. So I think exploring how we can, from the point of view of IIM Calcutta, we would like to leverage technology to be able to achieve our strategic objectives in the best possible fashion. For us, because we do not have the in-house capabilities, partnerships are very, very important. We've worked with various partners over the years, and I think one of the things we've learned is that the degree of mutual understanding of the partners is just so absolutely critical to help things move along. Now, we've got very shared incentives, very shared objectives, Coursera and we, in the context of how we want to move forward. I think it's going amazingly well, and I hope that we'll be able to leverage it further. I think I have another advantage, you see, because in one of my previous institutions at the University of Illinois, they'd work very closely with Coursera in launching the online MBA there. So I saw how that worked. During a period of time that I was visiting at HEC in Paris, they were working with Coursera. I saw very closely how it worked. So I've seen it from that point of view. I've seen it operating in the Coursera model, operating in different parts of the world. And so I personally understand how it can perhaps be synced with the IIM Calcutta capabilities to take it forward, somewhat uniquely because of my prior experiences. I would hope for the best going forward.
Thank you, Anju, and thank you all for an amazing discussion and for the great insights. I now hand over to David, who will tell our audience about the next session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, George. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes.
thank you very much, guys. Thank you all very much for a fantastic panel, and thank you, George, for excellent chairing. As George mentioned, unfortunately, that's all we have time for this session, but there's another session this afternoon at 2 p.m., this time with Andrew Main Wilson, CEO of AMBA and BGA, Patty Brown, MBA Director of Essex Business School, Chris Healy, Head of MBA Marketing and Recruitment at Alliance Manchester Business School, and Rajendra Srivastava, Dean and Novartis Professor of Marketing and Strategy and Innovation at the Indian School of Business. During this session, they'll be discussing Triple Crown accreditation. In case you haven't received an email reminding you about this, you should get it about an hour before the session with a link to join. And yes, all that remains for me to say is thank you once again to George, Anju, Martin, Francisco, and Lynn. And I look forward to seeing you all again at 2 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.